The subject of this episode is finishing the job when you have begun. When we start to practice Dhamma, certainly this is the case for those of us who are starting to practice from a position of not coming from a culture of knowing about Buddhism or being brought up in this culture. We start without already having a faith in samsara, in the teaching of the Buddha, as well as usually not knowing anything really about ourselves, about our mind, about how it works. So in the beginning, when we start to practice, we're kind of taking everything on the base of just faith, or on the base of having gained trust in some teacher or in something somebody has explained to us, having seen, oh, this makes sense. Oh, okay, this is true. Having realized there is something that makes sense here. So we start to practice based on this, but it's not a very strong base in the beginning. But there comes a point when we have really touched something, seen something for ourselves that we had not seen before, that our vision of the world becomes changed. And now, if we consider going back to our life of before, going back to just living a normal life, 9 to 5, having children, doing a job, stopping to practice, the idea of stopping to practice becomes unthinkable. So this teaching is addressed particularly to those practitioners who are at this stage, who have understood the teaching to the point that it becomes nonsensical to have any other aim in the life than to follow this teaching. And yet, although this may be true, it's still possible for there to be doubt. It's still possible for there to be sort of laziness in working towards the aim, that we don't see the urgency of finishing the job. And yet it is urgent that we finish the job. For this we had a couple of different examples or different analogies. So the first one of these asks you to imagine yourself about 200 years ago in Ireland, when there was a potato famine and nobody had enough to eat. People were starving to death. People were getting tuberculosis. Many people were dying, either of disease or of hunger. And it was basically a horrible, horrible place to live. So at that time, there was a great surge of people who left the island and who decided to cross the ocean to start a new life in the new land, which was America or Canada. So we have to imagine ourselves as one of these people who has decided to leave their family, their hometown, their old life, to leave everything behind. And now they have crossed the ocean on the famine ship, which, by the way, these ships were not for the faint-hearted. Many people were dying during the journey because they were cramped into such a tight space. They weren't given good food. They were in terrible living conditions. They were already weak. Their bodies were not in good shape. So it was already an achievement if you just managed to survive the voyage across the sea. So now suppose you arrive at the new land, but now you've come this far, but you're far from being done, because now you arrived in, for example, Quebec, and now the winter is coming. In Ireland, there was no harsh winter like there is in Quebec. In Ireland, we don't have snow, really, or maybe just a couple of inches. But in Quebec, you have a lot of snow. You have cold down to minus 40 degrees in the wintertime in a lot of places. And for the people who arrived in the place at that time, there was practically no infrastructure. It was almost an unexplored land. Very small town, perhaps existing. Almost no roads, no big farms. Everybody basically had to fend for themselves. So as somebody who's just arrived in a new land like this, can you afford to have doubt about whether you're capable of building a life for yourself here? Can you afford to spend your days thinking about Ireland or wishing to be back with your family? If you just think about going back, you see, oh, everything is dead, everything is burned behind. Probably your whole family could be dead for all you know. There is nothing to which you can return. So you have come this far, and when you've come this far, you've crossed the ocean. Now you cannot go back. And for somebody who's in this position, it is unthinkable to waste time thinking about their old life. They cannot afford to do that. They cannot afford to waste time having doubt about whether they made the right decision, or to wonder if they're able to do this job. They just have to get on with it fast, because they've so much to prepare. They have to prepare their shelter. They have to prepare somewhere where they can live, a place where they can be secure. They have to make sure that they will have enough food to eat over the winter. They have to have a way to store that food. So there can be simply no question of asking themselves whether they made the right choice, or sort of hovering between the two worlds. They have to just get on with preparing for winter, because whether or not they are prepared, winter is coming. In meditation, it's the same. There comes a point when we look back to how we were before, how our lives were before, we cannot countenance the idea of returning there. It's impossible. Same thing as if you were looking over the ocean at Ireland, which is a famine-ridden, disease-ridden country. You cannot go back there. So we've come far enough to make it impossible to return. However, we are not done. We have so much left to do. Until you are at least Sotapanna, there is no real security. You need to have seen Dhamma, to have removed these 3 big chains that are tying you to the samsara world, the self, doubt, right and ritual. You need to have blocked the bad destination. So you need to have this security that you are set on the path, at least. So until you have this security, at least, it's like you don't have a shelter, or your shelter is not completely built, and winter is coming. Means that whatever you do, whether you do the work or not, death is coming, which will stop all the work that you did, and which will really test to what point you were ready. So in a way, you kind of just don't have any choice. Your only choice is to continue to work with all the effort that you can put until you have finished the job. And in regard to this, there's another slightly subtler point to understand, that finishing the job really means finishing it. Like if one element is left undone, it's almost as if the whole job is not done. Because, for example, if you want to build a log house, and you go to all the effort of cutting all the logs, cleaning them, stacking them, making them wait, building them up, you build the log house, you prepared everything, put so much effort, so much time, cut a whole forest. But if you don't put a roof, then all the work that you do will be for nothing. Because as long as there is no roof on your log house, the wood cannot cure properly, cannot dry properly, and there can be ants that will go and make their house inside. It will rot, there will be mushrooms that will grow on it, and the whole thing will be lost. Eric and Ajahn, at one point, they saw this firsthand when they were building this place in the very beginning. They were building a log house, and they were in touch with 2 men who had built a log house but didn't have time to finish it, so they wanted to sell them the wood. But then when they went to get the wood, they found wherever they cut into it, wherever they tested it, it was rotten inside and there was full of ants. Because although they had done everything else perfectly, they had not put a roof. So it means as long as you are exposed, as long as you leave your mind exposed, that you haven't finished your job to completely uproot the kilesa that you're working on, even if there's a little bit of one left, well, then they can enter just like the humidity enters the wood. And when the humidity enters the wood, just like as when the kilesa enters the mind, if it has room to enter in, then it can ruin all the work that you have done. So essentially, overall, this means that as long as you're not Sotapanna, it's still very possible to completely lose your whole practice, and become totally lost. A third image in regard to finishing the job: if you have beans or chickpeas and you cook them only half, then you can't uncook them. So you have cooked them half, but if you serve them to people without cooking them completely, then everybody will complain about your meal and everybody will have stomach problem and gas and pain, and it will not be fun for anybody. So the same, uncooked, unfinished meditator is like uncooked beans. We don't like that. We prefer finished job. So as long as there is more work to be done, don't let yourself lose sight of the highest aim. As the Buddha was saying in, there's one sutta where he tells them, you think it's good enough being moral, it's good, but it's not enough. Don't let yourself lose sight of the higher aim. You think it's good enough having mindfulness, having sati, it's good, but it's not enough. Don't lose sight of the higher aim. You think it's good enough to reach the first jhana? Not enough. Think it's good enough fourth jhana or whatever kind of state of concentration? Not enough, not enough, not enough, until you have reached the highest aim, until you have finished the job. Because as long as the job is not finished, then it's like you've just arrived at the new land, but you haven't built yourself a shelter. You're not safe. Or it's like you have built a log house, but you haven't put a roof. The house is not finished. It cannot be a good house, and the whole thing can rot. Or it's like half-cooked beans. As long as the beans are not fully cooked and fully soft, fully digestible, they cannot be a good, digestible, nourishing food. So don't let your practice be like half-cooked beans. Don't let yourself get discouraged halfway through. Just keep going and finish the job.